So, I've been watching most of these films that I've reviewed so far on the streaming service Shudder, and as well as having feature films on their service, they also have a range of short films to check out. So, I watched a handful of them over the week, and I'm just going to quickly go over my thoughts and feelings on each one. First short I checked out was The Quiet Room. This was mostly because the poster caught my eye when I was scrolling down on the website, because someone in the top billing was called Alaska Thunderfuck, and I thought that was amazing. Unfortunately, I went on to find that this wasn't the actual person's name, which was slightly disappointing, I'm not gonna lie. But the film was still worth checking out in my opinion. What The Quiet Room is basically an LGBT horror film, which you don't really get that much nowadays. The film explores themes such as loss, depression, and sexuality, all in a pretty mature way. The film was shot really well, and the acting is all solid across the board. I also really like the creature design, played by Alaska Thunderfuck, who I discovered is a pretty famous drag artist and has starred in RuPaul's Drag Race, so if you're a fan of that show, there's that. The only part that really left me a little bit underwhelmed about The Quiet Room was probably the ending, which didn't make a whole lot of sense, especially in comparison with the rest of the film and where that was going. I think other people might have a different opinion, but it just didn't work that well for me. All in all though, I really enjoyed The Quiet Room actually. I would give it a recommendation. Next up, I saw Catcalls, which is probably one of the shortest ones that I saw out of the bunch. The film is basically just this guy driving about at night, being a pretty awful person, harassing women, and without spoiling too much, he ends up getting his comeuppance by two of his last victims. There's not a whole lot to critique here, mainly because of how short the film is, but for the feeling that the film's going for, which is obviously this 80s exploitation sort of vibe, you can even tell from the poster that it's trying to pay homage to an older generation of horror, and judging it by those standards, I think it mostly succeeds. It doesn't outstay its welcome at all. It's very much a film where the majority of it is just one really intense situation. So for a horror film that's more stripped back and has a retro tone to it, if that sounds appealing to you at all, go and check it out. After Catcalls, I saw El Gigante, which is a film about someone who's trying to cross the border but gets abducted and wakes up to find that he has a wrestling mask sewn onto his face and he's forced to wrestle a big hulking monster thing. Yeah, it's a pretty stupid fucking short, but I'm not sure if it knows how stupid it is. And don't get me wrong, I love a good stupid horror film, but if a film doesn't know how ridiculous its premise is, and it wants you to buy into it completely, it runs the risk of just leaving the viewer completely disinterested because they're not scared by what's happening because it's that unbelievable, and they're not entertained because the film is taking itself way too seriously. Prevenge had a really silly plot, but it knew how to balance its horror and comedy elements perfectly. El Gigante's horror pretty much just comes from really gratuitous gore porn scenes, just bottom of the barrel shock value moments that you'd see in the worst Eli Roth films. Yeah, as you can tell, I really didn't like this one, so I'm not recommending it. But if you like really gross, disgusting stuff, maybe check it out. I don't know if that's your thing. Yeah, I'm moving on. Next, I saw The Whistler, and I'm legit gonna have to look at what happened in this film. I can't remember.
5 minutes later.
Oh yes, The Whistler, the memorable The Whistler. From what I remember, this was okay. It's basically about a sister, I think, or it's a babysitter maybe, who's taking care of like a little child, and she reads her a bedtime story. It's a bit like the Babadook, I guess, where she reads this story and it eventually comes true. From what I remember, this had pretty good cinematography. There's a couple of nice looking shots and locations. You know, the short did have some money behind it, it looked like. But as you can tell, it's just not very fucking memorable. Yeah, I literally don't know what else to say. I can't recommend it or not recommend it because I can barely remember anything that happened in this film. It's like it's just a blank in my head. It's like it didn't even happen. Fuck it. I'm moving on. That's my review for The Whistler. Okay, I can finally go back to talking about full-length movies now. I am knackered, and I'm not even halfway through, I don't think, so this'll be fun. Train to Busan is a South Korean horror action film. This was released in 2016, and I remember it getting a lot of acclaim, but I never got the chance to see it, unfortunately. The film is about a father and a daughter who are trapped on a train in the middle of a zombie outbreak, and we meet a cast of characters who are also on the train, and it's basically just a high-stakes survival mission. So what I liked about Train to Busan, I liked how vicious the zombies were. The way that they piled onto each other and would contort their bodies looked brutal and did a great job of heightening the tension whenever the characters were in a bad spot. Though the action set pieces were mostly on point, I couldn't help but feel that there were some dodgy parts of the film. For example, some of the CGI that's used just doesn't look very good. I remember one scene in particular where it's a building on fire and it just doesn't look like it belongs at all. Another thing I had a slight problem with were the rules for turning into a zombie. They just didn't really seem consistent. Sometimes it would take no time at all for someone to turn into a zombie, but for other times where the story needed it and they needed that dramatic moment, it would take a very long time for them to turn into a zombie. So that didn't really make much sense, but at the same time, it didn't take away from my overall enjoyment of the film. I would say it's definitely more action-oriented than horror. Not that that's a bad thing. It's just if you're looking for a straight-up horror film, you're probably better off looking at one of the other films on this video. But Train to Busan is going to get a recommendation for me. I had fun. It's very fast-paced, and there are some very intense moments. Next up is Ma, and oh my god, I can't wait to talk about Ma. Ma is a horror film, ? That was released just last year, starring Octavia Spencer. The film is supposed to be a psychological horror where Octavia Spencer plays a grown woman luring teenagers to her basement to have parties, and then she gets more and more psychotic and more dangerous. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Octavia Spencer actually wasn't that bad, now that I'm thinking about it. But the rest of the film is utter dog shit in like the best way possible. It's so entertaining. The dialogue, oh my god, the dialogue. It's one of those situations where you can just tell that the writers have no idea how to write how teenagers speak. So they just come out with the most awful fucking things. Right, you know what? I'm gonna read some excerpts. I'm doing it. I'm getting the script up. Let's go.
Don't make me drink alone.
This is the only website that I can find that has the Ma script. Thank you, subs like script, shout out. I'm sick. What's wrong? It's cancer. You can beat it, Ma. My granddad did, and he's a fucking pussy, so... Stephanie, are you still having people over for a party tomorrow? Yeah? Cool. You can come with us if you want. Thanks, I'm going to the music festival with my mom. Okay, have fun with your mom. And all those fucking old people. Yo, what the fuck? What is it? I'm not touching it. Yo, what if that's a bomb, bro? That would suck so hard. Fucking suck. Oh my god, I love your bracelet. Where did you get it? Taylor gave it to me for our 5-month. Aww. So I finally let him go down on me. Fuck's sake. You got any pizza rolls, Ma?
You got any pizza rolls, Ma?
Right, I think that's got my point across, as for the dialogue at least. The rest of the film isn't much better, I can promise you that. There are just so many incomprehensible decisions made throughout this film that it's just mind-boggling to think that someone watched it back and thought, yes, that's a good idea. An example of this, right, is that one of the girls who attends Ma's parties is always pretending that she is passed out because her father is a priest or something like that. So she attends these parties. She's not being forced to go or anything like that. She attends these parties after school and pretends that she's passed out so she doesn't have to drink. And whilst watching it, I was just like, why would you even go to the party? Why wouldn't you just go home if you're gonna pretend that you passed out? She's doing this for like the full time that she's there as well. It's just such a weird and inconsequential detail. It makes no difference to the plot whatsoever.
That's Ashley, and she's faking it. Her dad's a pastor, so she comes to parties, pretends to be passed out so she doesn't have to drink, and then she won't get in trouble when she goes home. That might be the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
Another example of this would be later on in the film, one of the girls in the main group is sending a group Snapchat to tell everyone to block Ma so she can't get in touch with them anymore. And in sending this message, she sends the fucking message to Ma. And it's either that the character is a complete idiot or the writers are complete idiots who have no idea how social media works. I would honestly recommend this film just for the experience of watching Ma. It is, in my opinion, a so bad it's good film, for sure. I'm actually really surprised that this film hasn't been shit on quite as much as I'm doing right now. A lot of people actually like this film, and I don't understand why. If someone is watching this video and likes this film, can you explain why in the comments? Because I am at a loss, to be honest. Go get drunk and watch it with your mates. You'll have a good time. So, after seeing the masterpiece that was Ma, the next film had a lot to live up to.
Everybody was...
I eventually settled on Tigers Are Not Afraid, which is a Spanish horror film and is another Shudder exclusive. Unlike Ma, Tigers Are Not Afraid actually had good reviews and it was recommended by people who I follow from Letterboxd. The basic concept is very similar to Pan's Labyrinth, where it's a blend of supernatural fantasy with a horrifying reality. We follow a group of children who are living in the Mexican slums and are caught up in the middle of cartel and drug warfare. So going on around that, you have these fantastical elements as well, where the things that the kids interact with will come to life. There's also ghosts and other monsters as well that the characters interact with. But the film mostly has its feet planted in reality. Much like Pan's Labyrinth, Tigers Are Not Afraid shows that humanity can sometimes be the scariest threat of all. All of the child actors were great, and I believed their relationship with each other. I'm normally quite critical of child performances because they're mostly shite, but I thought that everyone was pretty grand here. However, although I enjoyed the film, I'd still think that there were some things that could have been improved. The incorporation of everything fantasy related didn't work as well as something like Pan's Labyrinth. In a film like Pan's Labyrinth, the entire plot is around the fantasy element, and you feel like you're watching this girl embarking on a huge quest. But here, it's just these little moments that are sporadically put into the film at random moments, and it just kind of feels like it's there to make sure that the viewer is still paying attention rather than serving some sort of purpose. And another thing is that the film just isn't that scary, in my opinion. And it's not like I was expecting something that would keep me up at night and leave me genuinely terrified, but whilst watching this, at points I forgot that I was watching a horror film. So much of this just feels like a drama. Not that that's a bad thing, but take away the sequences which feature ghosts and other creatures like that, which there are few of, it doesn't really feel like a horror at all to me. Still a very well made film with some great acting and a powerful message, but just didn't really scare me that much. So call me a tiger, because I was not afraid.